Hi team, Snowflake Dan here with you. Today we're going to be covering over how to connect your Snowflake account to Google Cloud Storage. From there, we're going to manually load some JSON data into a table, and then we'll follow that up by loading CSV data in an automated fashion using Snowpipe. So let's get into it. So the first thing you'll notice on the screen is a tutorial. This tutorial is going to be used throughout the process. It's going to help us with code snippets, some images, and overall to allow us to follow the process. So let's get to it. So the first thing we want to do is download some sample data. We'll use that later. Then we'll want to create a project. So we'll be able to click on that new project, give it a name, in this case Daniel Wilczak. Mine has already been set up, so I don't have to go through this process. I'll simply want to create a new bucket. So let's go into Google. Let's type in bucket. And let's create our first bucket. Now I'm going to call mine Daniel Wilczak for this tutorial, and I'll kind of follow this theme along, but call yours whatever you want. Let's click create. Let's confirm. And then our bucket has been created. So the first thing we'll want to do inside of this bucket is simply just upload that sample data. So we'll click upload files. We'll actually want to unzip our files first, so my apologies. We'll go into there, unzip it, and then we'll open it up because we're only interested in uploading two of the files, or two of the folders, excuse me. So I'll simply drag those over. Those two folders have been uploaded, and if we click into one of them, we'll notice one has a CSV file, and again, the other has some JSON data inside of it. Great, so let's head back to that tutorial. We'll scroll down. We'll notice that we uploaded that data, and the next step is to go into Snowflake. So we'll copy that code over. We'll go to Snowflake, and we'll want to start a new worksheet. So we'll go to projects, then worksheets, and then we'll start a new worksheet. I'll paste that code in there, and we'll start from the top and go down. So the first thing we'll want to do is switch to the sysadmin role because the sysadmin can create things. The next thing is we want to create a database called raw. Then we'll create a schema called GCP. We'll need a warehouse to be able to upload that data, so we'll create one called development. Then we'll want to use the account admin role to be able to create the GCP integration. And as we notice here, it'll want me to update the name of the bucket. So again, I'll put in my name because that's the bucket name, and then we'll grant usage to that integration to the sysadmin so it can use it when creating objects. Finally, it'll give us some values in return, and these values is what we're going to use back in GCP. So I'll select all of that and hit run. As we noted, everything has been created, and if we wanted to see what was created, we can go into raw, GCP, and we notice no objects, but we have the database and the schema, and we have the principal, which we'll have to add in later. So let's head back to the tutorial. We successfully ran all of that. So what we'll want to do is go to IAM, create a role, or we'll select on roles and then create a role, and then we'll give it some names. So let's head back to GCP. Let's go to IAM. Then we'll scroll down to roles and we'll create a role. Next, we'll want to give it a name. So I'll keep mine simple with Daniel Wilczak -roles. Next, I'll want to give it a name. So this is the Snowflake integration role ID. We could simply call it Snowflake. And in my case, I might have to call that Snowflake 1 because I've done this tutorial before, but the next part will be adding permissions. So if we go back to the tutorial, you'll notice it asks us to add permissions, and it states these are the specific ones that we have to add by looking at the documentation within Snowflake. So if we open that up, we'll notice that if we want to do only data loading, these are the 3 permissions we need to add. But if you want to, for example, load or unload or remove files once loaded, then we'll have to add these additional permissions. But for today, we're going to keep it simple by doing the storage buckets get, storage objects get, and storage objects list. So this could be a little bit tricky because in the add permissions, we'll actually want to click here and start typing in what we want. So in this case, I'm going to go over and actually do some copying and pasting because I'm never the best at this. So we'll copy that. We'll head over here. We'll add that in. Hit enter. My apologies. We'll want to click on filter, or excuse me, add permissions, then do the filtering. And then I could put in my storage buckets get, and we'll notice that we get a checkbox here, so I could click add, and I can add that as well. And so we'll want to add the next 3 as well. So again, I'll go back to Snowflakes, get the next one. Go back, filter that. Notice we can click it there. And again, I'll add it. And then finally, we'll add the third one, which is the list. Click add permissions, filters. Again, we'll add the final one and click add. Now, I do want to take a pause here. There is one thing in the documentation. If you have a new GCP account from March of 2024 on, there is a policy that has been enacted by Google, and it won't allow you, when you click create or to save this, you'll have to update it. So there is a warning in the documentation later on that talks about when we add the principal that it'll block it. So I just want to call it out now. So we'll finally head back. We'll click create. We can notice our roles has been created. Now, if we head back to the tutorial, the next thing we'll want to do after it's been created is we'll want to check on it, or click the checkbox next to our bucket. So we'll head back to our bucket, and then we'll click add principal. So if we head back, we'll close this tab. We'll go back to our bucket. We'll click the checkbox, and then we'll want to click permissions. And what will happen is this side menu will come up. We'll want to click add principals. And so if we follow the tutorial, what we'll want to do is actually copy our stored GCP service account we got from Snowflake earlier. So I'll simply go back, I'll click the copy button, and I'll head back to our GCP account. I'll put that in, and we'll notice we get a drop down. We'll click on that drop down. And then next is to select the role. So if we click on custom, we'll notice that we could select our role. So I'll select that. And then here is when I click save, is if you don't have that policy enacted. If we head back to the tutorial, you'll notice it says if you get a domain restricted share, you could simply click the little drop down and it will walk you through the process of adding those credentials to your organization so that you can make these integrations with GCP. Great, so we'll head back, we'll click save. Notice we didn't get the error, but if you did, please follow that process or that drop down. We'll close that out and we'll head back to the tutorial. So now, after we've clicked save, we've given all the permissions and we could head back to Snowflake and start loading some data in. So we'll head back to Snowflake. I'm going to create a new worksheet to separate these. So the first thing we'll do is actually just set up some context. So we'll set what database, schema, role, and warehouse we want to use. Then we'll want to create what's known as a stage, or AKA a folder in Snowflake. So it asks us here to update the bucket name. So I'll simply call mine Daniel Wilczak, like we did earlier. And then I'll run this specific portion of it. And I'll take a pause here to showcase how you can see this and what's so cool about it. So if we go to raw, the GCP schema, if we don't see anything right away, simply click the refresh button. And now we can see the stage. We can click over and hover on it. And then we can click open stage details. So now what Snowflake is able to do is actually reach out to GCP and see the files and folders that are actually in the bucket itself. So if we wanted to, we can look into that JSON folder and actually see the file that's inside of there. But before we do this, we actually want to create a table and then load that file, or the files, if there were multiple, into a table. So let's head back to the worksheet. Let's click on JSON. And so here we're going to create our first file format. So file formats allow you to specify what file is going to be loaded so that Snowflake knows exactly how to load it in. In our case, it's very simple. It's simply just we're setting the type as JSON. Next, what we'll want to do is create a table called JSON. And what's special about this table is that not only we're loading the file name into it, we're also loading the data as a variant column. So Snowflake does store semi-structured data natively within Snowflake. So we'll simply click run on that. And then if we do a refresh on the left side, we'll notice that we have a table now called JSON. And if we want to go to the definition, we would be able to see that definition we created earlier. Great. So finally, we're at the step where we could start loading some of this data, and we're going to do it manually like I talked about at the beginning of the tutorial. So we'll use the copy into command to say copy into the table name, and then these are the two columns, and how we get the data to load that in is we're simply going to do a select statement where we get the file name or the metadata file name that's provided to us. Then we'll simply use the $1 to say all of the data that's inside of there. And then we'll select where we want to grab it from. So in this case, we'll simply use the GCP stage we created earlier. Then we'll use the JSON folder. So again, if you had multiple files inside that folder, it's going to load all of it all at once. So let's run that and let's load the data in. Great. So now we can see that we've got a status of loaded, rows parsed 1, rows loaded 1. So if we do a quick select star from, and we head over and do a quick refresh on the left side, notice we could click on that JSON, and then Snowflake gives us a little helper tool called place name and editor. So it's raw is the database name, GCP is the schema, JSON's the table. So I'll put a semicolon and hit run. And then now we could see that we've loaded that data in from that file into that table, and if we wanted to, we could start querying specific portions of this or flattening it and then querying the data. So great way of showing that Snowflake can store semi-structured data. But if we go back to the tutorial, we want to do this on a more automatic basis, and so that's where really Snowpipe comes into play. So the next part of this tutorial is going to be using Snowpipe. So the first thing we'll want to do is actually go to our project and grab the ID, because we're going to use that in the CLI in a second. Really, the CLI works in the browser, so don't feel too scared about this. In CLI, I mean command line interface. So let's do that. So now we'll head over, we'll grab our project ID. So I'll hover over that, I'll click copy, and then we'll click on the CLI. And so while that's booting up, I'm going to head over back to the tutorial, and we'll notice here that it wants us to open that up, and we'll get the CLI down below. So the first thing we'll want to do is configure the project. So basically say, hey, this is the project. So inside of Snowflake, I'm going to start up a new worksheet, and simply for copying, pasting, or using it as a notepad, I'll paste in my project. I'll go back to the tutorial and I'll copy the code, and then I'll simply add them together. So again, I'll copy this out, copy my project ID, and I'll paste it in there. So we can copy this whole command, head back to GCP, and we'll notice that I have the CLI up and running. I'll simply paste that in, and it'll set the project. So I'll authorize it. It's been authorized, and then we can head back to the tutorial and go to the next step. So the next step is creating what's a notification. So we'll want to accomplish that and apply it to our bucket itself. So we'll head back to to Snowflake, because we want to paste this in, because we're going to have to update it. And here it asks us to update the storage bucket name. So I'll simply put in my name, because that's the bucket's name. We'll copy that. We'll head back to GCP, and I'll paste that in. And now we can see that it's been created, or a notification has been created. So we can close out of the CLI, but I'll head back to the tutorial to validate that. Yep, we can close out of the CLI and go to PubSub. So I'll close this, and then I'll search PubSub. Great. And so now we could see our Snowpipe topic is added here. We could head back to the tutorial and we'll notice it wants us to click on it and then head down to create subscription, and then we'll add in the necessary portions. So we'll simply click on it. We'll head down and click create subscription, and we'll want to give it a name. So again, I'm going to keep mine simple and call it Daniel Wilczak -subscription. Great. And then from what I believe, everything in here can be defaulted, and we'll just validate that with the tutorial. Yep, we could just use the defaults, and we'll want to copy the subscription full name, name and path. So we'll click create. And now it's been created, so we can simply copy that, and we'll want to add that back to our notepad in Snowflake. Great. So let's keep going along with the tutorial. We'll notice here we now get a code snippet, so we'll want to copy that code snippet, head back to Snowflake, and I'll paste that in here. And then we notice that we're going to create a notification integration, and the one thing it requires from us is the subscription name. So we'll add our full path. Let me validate that very quickly. Here's the example, and we notice that is the full path. So we'll head back to Snowflake. We'll put in our path. Great. We'll click select on all of it, and we'll run it. And then again, it gives us a principal value, which we'll be using later on. So let's head back to the tutorial and see what it wants us to do next. So it wants us to go to the pub sub and then to subscription, and then click on the subscription again. So we'll do that. So we'll type in pub sub. Well, we'll actually just click on subscription because it's already here. Then we'll click on our subscription, and we notice we get a panel here, and it wants us to click on the add principal. But if you don't see that panel, you might need to click on the show info panel and then click on the add principal step. So let's do that. So we'll click on add principal, and we'll head back to Snowflake to grab our principal. So we'll copy this value. We'll paste it in there again. But in this case, we haven't created a new role. So what we'll want to do is when we go to the tutorial, you'll notice that it tells us to click on pub sub and then pub sub subscriber. So let's do that. So we'll add a role. We'll scroll down to pub sub subscriber, and then let's validate by just making sure that's the only thing. So we'll click save and then go to IAM. Perfect. That's saved. So we want to go back to IAM, back to the tutorial. And then what it wants us to do is simply grant access and then use that same principle one more time. So we'll click grant access, paste in our principal value, and then this time we're going to be using a different assign role. So we'll simply scroll down, and in this case it wants us to use monitor view. So monitor view, we'll add monitor view, and this is what it should look like. So we'll head back, we'll paste that in, we'll click monitor view, and then we'll click save. Great. So now that's set up. We're ready to head back to Snowflake and start the process of automatically loading some of that CSV data. So now I'll head back to Snowflake. We'll add a new worksheet and we'll paste that in. Again, we'll want to set the context one more time. And then in this case, I want to infer what the schema should be. So I don't want to write it out. I'm going to be a lot lazier this time. But I do want to take a pause and showcase how you could do this in the UI. So if we simply go back to our stage, we can click on CSV. Then we could see that we have a CSV file here. And so I want to click on the three dots and load that into a table. In this case, I'm simply going to call it example. So we'll create a new table called example. We'll click next. And then we'll notice that Snowflake has inferred the schema using the UI. We're going to showcase how you can do this in code, but for now I wanted to showcase how you could do it with just the user interface. So here we could add it, If we had any kind of specialties with this CSV, we can change those. For example, if we wanted no header or skip the first line, etc., or different delimiter, we could change that. But in this case, we'll keep it simple. We'll simply click load. Now Snowflake will load our CSV, and we notice we now have a table called example. So this is how to accomplish it using the UI. But in our code, we're going to do this manually, aka written by code. So the first thing we'll want to do is create a file format called infer, and then we'll do the create table with the name CSV. We'll specify a location. Again, it's that GCP stage, and then the CSV folder that we want to use to create the table. So we'll simply run that. And if we open up the left-hand side menu, go to the GCP schema, we can open up tables, and we'll notice that if we click on it, we have the exact same table as the example has. So nothing's changed. It's just that simple. Next, what we'll want to do is create what's known as a Snowpipe or a pipe in Snowflake to automate the process. So first, we're going to create the pipe. We're going to call it CSV. Auto ingest is true. We're going to use that integration we created earlier. And then, like we did with the manual load, we'll use the copy into command to load the data in. So if I hit run on this, it should take, roughly between 10 to 15 seconds based on if you've created one of these before. So Snowflake has to make that authentication and connection with GCP when creating this pipe and ensure all of the notifications have been created, all of the different roles have been assigned. So it might take a few moments. So perfect. So the pipe has been created while I was explaining it. The next thing we could do is kind of load any files that the pipe hasn't loaded because it's been sitting there. And so we could simply do an alter pipe refresh, and we'll notice that the sample1 file has been added. So if we do a quick select star from, and then again, we go up to CSV, we place the name in the editor, we hit run. We'll notice we have no records in there yet, but within a few moments, that file will go from GCP and be loaded into Snowflake. So during that process, we could do a little bit of a setup where we kind of add the next file in. So what I'll want to do is simply go back to GCP, type in my bucket. So I'll look for my bucket, go to buckets, and then I'll click on Daniel Wilczek because that's the bucket. We'll go to CSV. And what we'll want to do is actually start adding the next one. And so where we're going to get the next one from is going to be really simple. We're simply going to open up our folder that we just downloaded. We'll go to CSV and we'll just rename that file sample2. And so this will essentially give us 20 records because there was only 10 records in there originally. So I'm going to take a pause here. I'll head back to GCP, click the upload. Or actually, I don't have to. So we'll just head back to Snowflake and see if that file is loaded really quickly. And so here we could see, hey, the file has been loaded that was sitting in there originally, not our new one because we never added it to the bucket. But if I do a count star, we'll notice that we have 10 records. So now if I go back to the bucket and I go to my downloads and I take that sample2.csv and I add it to the folder. Oh, my apologies. I'll click upload files. I'll click sample2, click open, and we'll upload that next one. And so now sample2 has been added. So if we go to Snowflake, this might take between 30 seconds to a minute to run, but we'll just keep it here and we'll keep refreshing until we see the count actually go up. Great. So now we can see that the count has gone up to 20. This actually took me a little bit longer to see the first one, so please be patient. When you set up the process with GCP, that first initial file could take a little while. It took me roughly about 3 minutes to get this working. But thank you for watching. This has been loading Snowflake or connecting your Snowflake account to GCP using Snowpipe and also using a copy into command to manually load data into your Snowflake account. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.